I'm your host, Joel Perez, and you're watching Wrestling with Politics. And today we're going to be discussing some recent comments by AOC, Zohran Mamdani, and other progressive leaders that have been going viral online and have sparked a massive debate. Of course, for all of those who know what I'm talking about, today we're going to be discussing AOC's comments saying that woke one is crazy. Let's not waste any time here and let's roll this clip from AOC because we have a lot to talk about here.
I have a local city councilman that has this saying, woke one was crazy.
Woke one was crazy. Okay, that's interesting.
And I think that what's important is that we have to assess what
was it? I mean, did the movement go too far with some of those positions? I mean, you briefly supported the idea of defunding the police.
Well, I think that during this time and especially during COVID, there was a huge opening of the Overton window. We were shut down. There was some of the highest unemployment rates that we have seen because of those shutdowns. Yeah. And I think that the doors were really open in trying to entertain any and every policy that was going to get us to a better place. And I actually think that the discussions that were had in that time were quite fruitful. I think that when we talk about crime today, it's fundamentally different than the way that we talked about crime in bringing crime down, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that we all share in the goals of having as low a crime rate as possible. I think that, during lockdown, of course, rhetoric in that time is not rhetoric that we would use today. And I'm grateful that these candidates have the opportunity to present who they are to their electorate and what they're campaigning on in this moment.
And before we discuss what AOC just said there, let's roll Zohran Mamdani, the mayor of New York City. He had a very fascinating response when he was asked about AOC's comments. Let's see what Zohran Mamdani had to say here.
Do you think woke one was crazy?
Look, I think that each person has a responsibility to tell New Yorkers, to tell Americans when they're running for office what they believe. And sometimes what you believe can change. It can develop, it can grow. And I know that there are some for whom they still believe in that. I've made very clear that I do not believe in defunding the police, that I will not be defunding the police.
And there's a lot to respond to there in both of those clips. But before we get into it, I feel like we need to define what woke one means, because it could really mean anything. And to the extent that woke one means cancel culture and identity politics and banning the people you disagree with off the internet for saying things that you disagree with, of course I disagree with woke one, and I'm glad we're moving past that. And if that is the definition of woke one, then AOC, she's the embodiment of all of that. She's the poster girl for all of those things, cancel culture and identity politics and all that crap. So AOC, if anything, when she says woke one is crazy, she's calling herself crazy. But that's the thing here. I don't think that's what they're saying woke one means. I don't think that's the part of woke one that they're trying to move past. What they're trying to move past here is the phrase defund the police. That's what Mamdani said in that video that he doesn't believe in anymore. And to that extent, to the extent that that's what woke one means, well, then we have a big problem here if you're a progressive, because defund the police is one of the tenets of the progressive movement. It's one of the tenets of the DSA left. And the two biggest progressive leaders, including Bernie Sanders, who also tried to move past defund the police, they're all trying to move past it. They're all trying to say they don't believe in that anymore. And so that right there is a big problem, because when it comes to defund the police, these leaders, they should be willing to have the debate and make the argument for defunding the police. Because if you listen to the mainstream media and the way they frame it, they try to make this issue as if it means that we're going to abolish the police, that defund the police means that there's going to be no police in your neighborhood, that people are just going to be allowed to run rampant. And of course, that's not what defund the police means. Defund the police means that you reduce the police budget. And in a state like New York City, which has one of the largest police budgets in the world, in the city that Mamdani is the mayor of, that policy right there, it makes a lot of sense. You defund the police, not entirely, but you reduce their budget because it's way too damn big, and we basically become a police state, and you move that money into social issues, into issues like education and healthcare and things that will reduce crime in another way. Police isn't the only way to reduce crime, for those who don't know. But instead of making that argument, they're not even willing to have the discussion. They're not even willing to have the debate to begin with. And they're just backtracking and saying, oh, we don't believe in defund the police anymore. And so that right there, it makes the complete point that I've been making about all these progressives, that they're cowards, that they're spineless, that they have no courage. Because whether or not you agree or disagree with defund the police, at least have the balls to fight for it, to stand for what you believe in. And what they're trying to make it seem like here is that, oh, we've changed our minds. People can change their minds and they can evolve. That's what Mamdani was saying, right? But that's not what they're doing here. What's going on here is that these progressives, they're not willing, they're recognizing that defund the police, it's not as politically popular as it once was in 2020 when the George Floyd riots were going on and all of that crap was happening, when there was literal riots happening trying to get defund the police to happen. They're recognizing, oh, in that moment they were all willing to say it, right? Why? Because it was politically popular. But now that it's not as popular, now that it's unpopular, they're backtracking and saying, oh, well, we can't stand for that anymore. We've evolved. And that right there is complete garbage, because whether or not an issue is popular or unpopular, you should be willing to stand for it because it's the right thing to do. And AOC was talking about the Overton window. With your millions of supporters, AOC, and Mamdani as well with his millions of supporters, they should be willing to move the Overton window. That's what makes you a leader. Being willing and able to change people's minds, because maybe it's not popular to defund the police, but you are supposed to make it popular. You're the leader of the progressive movement. And if the very leaders of the progressive movement aren't willing to fight the battles that need to be fought in order to advance progressive ideas, then what are we doing here? AOC, Mamdani, and Bernie Sanders, they're accepting the framing of the corporate news media. They're accepting the framing of the right wing, and they're supposed to be the left wing. No, they're kowtowing to the right wing. And so what does that make them? That makes them cowards, because what are you supposed to do here? You're supposed to argue for these issues and advance them as much as you possibly can. So you don't know now whether this is what they actually believe or not, but whether or not they actually believe it, they're not willing to fight for it. So what does it matter? So where does that leave the progressive movement? Like I've said in other videos, if you're following these people, it leaves it in a black hole. It's completely dead, and there's nowhere for you to go. Because if you believed in defund the police, which in a certain extent is a solid idea, so many places in this country have overextended their police force and used the police in order to criminalize their population, instead of making sure that the population doesn't end up criminals to begin with. But instead of being able to make that argument and explain to people that defund the police, no, it doesn't mean completely getting rid of the police budget, they're unwilling to even have the debate to begin with. And when it comes to Zohran Mamdani, he was somebody who, when he was running, made himself seem very progressive. And now, of course, now that he's in office, he's unwilling to support and fight for the things that his base was wanting from him. So that's what they mean here when they say that woke one is crazy. Unfortunately, I wish that they were talking about identity politics. I wish they were talking about cancel culture. But in reality, what they're talking about is taking a stand on an actually important issue, like the overextension of our police force in this country. That's a key issue that progressives and socialists, if these people really claim to be democratic socialists, they should be willing to fight for these things and make the argument and push the Overton window. But instead, they have no political courage when they have the most political capital. That's the one thing about AOC and Zohran Mamdani. They have millions of supporters and they have the ability, if they wanted to change people's minds and actually make a difference when it comes to these issues. But if they're not even willing to have the discussion, if they're not even willing to correct the framing of the corporate news media, then what are we doing here? When it comes to Zohran Mamdani specifically, there's a lot of publicity going on right now that Zohran Mamdani is filling potholes and that he's fixing all these surface level issues in New York City. But that's a good thing, and I'm not going to say it's a bad thing that small issues and local things that are happening in New York City are getting fixed. But what did Zohran Mamdani run on? He ran on making the buses fast and free. He's making them faster, but he's forgetting about the free part. He ran on freezing the rent, and he froze the rent for rent stabilized apartments in New York City, but he didn't freeze the rent for people who are living with private landlords, for all New Yorkers. So, of course, you're getting a half-assed version of all these issues. And then when it comes to defund the police, Zohran Mamdani, he's once said that he was for it, and now that he's in office, he's completely against it. So what are we seeing here? We're seeing another example of a politician who claimed to be the most progressive, who claimed that he would fight for the working class, who claimed that he would advance these issues for his base. But when he gets into office, the most conservative outcome, the half-assed, half-measure policy positions is what you actually get. And the substantive lives of the people who he claims to support aren't actually getting that much better. So they might distract you with the fact that these potholes are getting fixed, but in reality, the groundbreaking, transformative things that he ran on that would materially change people's lives, he can't get any of that done. So it's a complete betrayal of the working class. And these progressive leaders, they're again, this is another example that if you haven't realized it yet, you need to understand that these people, they're not going to get you if you actually believe in any of these issues. They're not going to get you where you need to be. They're cowards. They have no political courage. And this is another exact example of that. This is proof of that. They're not going to get any of these issues passed. And why? Because their role is to get you and sheep herd you, as I've said before, back into the Democratic Party, because they're not actually democratic socialists. They're closeted Democrats. And what have I said before? You can never trust a Democrat. And you can't trust AOC. You can't trust Zohran Mamdani. And you especially can't trust Bernie Sanders, because they're gonna stab you in the back the first opportunity they can get. And this woke one is crazy nonsense. It's not an example of their views evolving and them going into more moderate positions. This is an example of them not being willing to actually fight the good fight and advance these issues despite how unpopular they may be. It's their job to make them popular, and they're not willing to do their jobs because they're backstabbers, they're traitors, and they're cowards. For now, that's all I have to say. Let me know what you guys think about this entire debate. Do you think that woke one is crazy? Let me know in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you all very, very soon.